Hi, second graders. We have been talking and reading about when we really get to know characters like we would a best friend almost, that we can maybe predict how they're going to act, what they're going to say, what their behavior is going to be in a book. So today we're going to continue talking about those things. Let's first do a little activity where I give you a scenario and let's decide how Frog and Toad might act in this situation, okay? So Frog and Toad go to Disney World. And at Disney World, Toad loses his Mickey ears. And they search and they can't find the Mickey ears. How do you think that Frog is going to respond to that situation? I think since Frog is kind of upbeat and he's the guy that's always looking for an answer, I think he's going to come up with a plan. He's going to say, all right, first let's look here. Let's think about where we're going to go. Where have we been? And he's going to find the answer to this situation. Then I think that Toad, because he's a little bit more on the grumpy side and he is a little bit more negative, I think he's going to be like, I'm never going to find my Mickey ears. My life is over kind of scenario. Did you kind of think the same thing too? Well, then we just used what we know about Frog and Toad to determine or predict what is going to happen in that situation. So let's do that again today. Let's read another little story about Frog and Toad. This is from the book Frog and Toad Are Friends. And let's read the story A Lost Button. Okay? Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last they went back home to Toad's house. Oh, drat, said Toad. Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of my buttons on my jacket. Okay, so he's lost the buttons on his jacket. How do you think Toad might react to that? Or what is your prediction of what he's going to say? And even what do you think Frog is going to say? How will he react to that? Here's the answer. Don't worry, said Frog. We'll go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button. They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. Here is your button, cried Frog. That's not my button, said Toad. That button is black. My button has white. Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. Excuse me, said the sparrow. Did you lose a button? I found one. That is not my button, said Toad. That button has 2 holes. My button has 4 holes. Toad put the button with the 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. Here is your button, said Frog. That is not my button, cried Toad. That button is small. My button was big. Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. I heard you were looking for a button, he said. Here is one that I just found. That is not my button, wailed Toad. That button is square. My button was round. Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. Here is your button, said Frog. That is not my button, shouted Toad. That button is thin. My button was thick. Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There, on the floor, he saw his white, four-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." Toad took all of the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. So when we were reading this story, did you guess that Toad would be the one that kind of thought, the world is coming to an end because I've lost my button? Everybody was trying to help Toad, and he was just kind of getting more angry and a little bit more negative, right? He was screaming and wailing and all those things. And Frog was the one who was like, "We'll find your button, Mr. Toad." He was positive, and he wanted to help solve the problem that Toad found himself in. Did you or were you able to predict that Toad and Frog would act like they did? I bet you could. I want you today to read in your very own book and try to predict what you think the character is going to act like or say. When you see a problem in your story, I want you to think in your head, what do I think this character will do, say, or act like as we go forward in the book? Okay? I know you can do it. I know you can. I'm so proud of you all and how much you're reading at home. Hang in there.